think the thing that I like the most is facilitating success, whether that's within our clients, within the members of our team, or even just people adjacent to us. If there are ways that we can help out, we generally try to do that. So we've worked with Ruby Central for a long time, which is a nonprofit community group, done a bunch of design work for them. We've worked with human trafficking, folks fighting human trafficking, and built some sites for them. Like, just whenever we see opportunities, we do our best to take advantage of them and try to help people be successful. We don't always have those resources, but I think more often than not, we as people have the ability to help more than we know and see.
Welcome to Ansible Edge, the podcast highlighting visionary leaders driving small tech-focused businesses. We showcase agile innovators converting bold ideas into sustainable growth and operational excellence. Each episode offers actionable insights, inspiring stories, and practical guidance. Join us in exploring the future, learning from successes and challenges, and understanding technology's transformative potential with empathy and curiosity.
Welcome to today's episode. We are honored to have Jim Remsik, founder and CEO at Flagrant, as our guest. Jim launched Flagrant in 2020 with the vision of building high-performing engineering teams that prioritize human-centered software development over cookie-cutter solutions. With a focus on intentional design, ethical tech, and meaningful relationships, Jim brings decades of experience building products and leading teams that care deeply about the people behind and in front of the screen. In this episode, Jim shares how Flagrant approaches software as a form of communication, what it means to design for positive human outcomes, and why consistency in the tech industry is more important than ever. We also dive into AI's evolving role in development and design, ethical implications around training data and creator rights, and the real-world impact of automation on emerging talent. Join us for an insightful conversation about leadership, ethics, and building better software by putting people first.
Jim, thanks a lot for joining us today. Where are you calling from?
Calling from Oxford, Wisconsin, and most people have no idea where that is. I like to say that we're 20 minutes east of the Dells being our answer to Branson.
Nice.
So is the music scene where you are good or no? Surprising considering how close you are.
So it is largely, beautiful rock formations. Strangely enough, for our climate, it seems strange to me, but we have America's largest water park, which is open about 4 to 5 months out of the year because it gets cold quick. But yeah, it's all just, tourist traps and beautiful rock formations, what have you.
That's nice. We live not too far from Red Rocks here in Colorado, which is also known for its beautiful rock formations and
music.
I think that's something that we can definitely, yes, and music. So things I think that we can all get behind, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so in preparation for this call, I've been doing a crawl of your LinkedIn and your website and everything, and I noticed on your website that you really emphasize building high-performing engineering teams and not software factories. I think it's a really refreshing take that you really emphasize that in your marketing and just everywhere. And I'd just love to hear a little bit more about that mindset.
Yeah, I do think that we look at software largely as communication, and that is true of the end user on either side, but also about everybody that's working on it along the way. Worked with a really large consumer electronics brand that was considering adding some user generated content to their products. We're brought in to help them build up this little thing that wasn't the thing that they were going to sell, but it was a portal to the third-party company that was going to have to deal with all of the uploaded content that was maybe less than desirable. So they were looking at, you can imagine the worst things on the internet that people might think, whether it's for fun or for other purposes, this would be a great way to distribute that. And so we wound up working with our client's client and getting their requirements to build out what is ultimately a really critical part of the infrastructure for any sort of community, and spent time making sure that their experience for their people who had to do this really hard job was as good as it could be. And so we really focused on the positive outcomes that they were impacting without reminding them of all the terrible things that they had to swim through in order to get there. So I think just we really try to consider the human behind everything. It is sadly not as common as you would think.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
makes sense.
absolutely. I mean, I think that a lot of software development in the agile processes definitely try to address that and, trying to deliver something as quick, like a thing as quickly as possible and getting user sentiment and what's the term that they look for? Uh, delight the customer, right? But I do find that lacking in a lot of places in a lot of ways.
I think um, it takes buy-in at every level in order to actually accomplish that. And I think that just there are lots of folks that are looking at, whether they're spreadsheets or whether it's, they have bosses that they need to respond to. They don't feel empowered or for other reasons just try to get through as quickly as possible. Building software is not cheap always, but it can be done with intention and you can get to where you need to get to quicker as long as you put those things up front.
Jim, can you share a bit about your role and how it fits into the bigger picture at Flagrant?
Yeah, so I started Flagrant in January of 2020. Seemed like a good idea at the time. No looming pandemics in the horizon or anything like that. We founder, CEO, never been super huge on titles, but effectively what I'm responsible for is sales and building relationships for our team to execute projects against. And so last week that looked like me, spending a bunch of time in a car, uh, running around meeting people in Atlanta, Greenville, South Carolina, but not so much to sell people, but just to build relationships. I take a very long tail approach to relationships and just try to help people be successful. And I don't get to say what that success looks like for them. And so it's a lot of listening to people and understanding where they are and where they'd like to get to. And is there some way that we can be of help?
Nice. So what do you like most about your role?
I think the thing that I like the most is facilitating success, whether that's within our clients, within the members of our team, or even just people adjacent to us. If there are ways that we can help out, we generally try to do that. So we've worked with Ruby Central for a long time, which is a nonprofit community group, done a bunch of design work for them. We've worked with human trafficking, folks fighting human trafficking, and built some sites for them. Like, just whenever we see opportunities, we do our best to take advantage of them and try to help people be successful. It's not, we don't always have those resources, but I think more often than not, we have, we as people have the ability to help more than we know and see.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine it would be very fulfilling to empower people working to fight human trafficking and seeing the results of that work.
Or perhaps, not seeing the results as well. Like sometimes you just have to go on faith that you're having an impact. But, if you did and the world's just a little bit better, like that's great.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I used to work with a software company that provided software for domestic violence shelters. And, we never see the day-to-day interactions. And with HIPAA, we could, of course, not look into the data that we were tracking, but just knowing that it was, or hoping that it was doing some good for the people involved was really fulfilling.
Yeah. And it, like sometimes um, you have to take that success, as the stories that get told by the folks that you're working with, like they do get to see the impact, and so you have to live vicariously through them sometimes.
Yeah, 100%.
So, zooming out a little bit to your role leading a software development company, what major trends are you seeing emerging in the market?
I think that we are probably, if I round it off, probably a year into like the hype cycle of AI. So everybody's trying to figure out how to work that into everything. I think that there's still a lot of people that have no idea how it's helpful, but they're still asking for it. And there are uses for it today that are good, and I think the definitions around a lot of these things are a little bit suspect as well. Just a lot of people, when they say AI these days, they actually mean machine learning. And if you talk to somebody about machine learning, it's like that's a tried, tested, and true technology. I've got zero qualms about integrating that. I saw that. Look, Josh, what was that?
No, I think that it's a matter of like garbage in, garbage out, and I think that a lot of people who don't necessarily know how to approach machine learning don't know how to clean their data or provide the right inputs to get the things that they actually want out of it. So it's not so much that I disagree with you. I just think that people like to paint things with a really broad brush and don't necessarily know or understand what's needed to get the things that they're looking for. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I would say we're in violent agreement. And what we wind up, I think with AI, what we wind up with is we had this broad brush of machine learning, and now we've got, a wide sprayer and people who don't really understand all of the technology as well as the impact of the technology see just this outcome that they've been promised, and they're like, I want that outcome. Okay, in order for us to get that outcome, we need to like consume all of the world's content, and nobody will ever get credit for that. Like, well, I don't want that. So where do we break it down? I think aspirationally, um, I desire like more ethical AI solutions. I think that those conversations are just now starting to happen, for a lot of people. People understand AI. Maybe they're using ChatGPT to help them send emails at work. But I think unless and until we get more education around those things, like what is this actually doing, and what is it trained on? How is that impacting both us and our world? I think we'll continue to see people be promised the moon, and uh, them try to build that out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the hardest thing to, or the thing, not the hardest thing, but the thing to keep in mind is that we're seeing really good outcomes with AI for really large companies. And what people are generally not seeing is the amount of investment, both in human time, but also just like processing time and all of the things that go into it. And then people look at things at companies like Meta and AWS and just massive companies that are seeing these huge gains from the use of AI. They want those returns, obviously. While AI and language models and things like that are definitely becoming more accessible for smaller businesses, the amount of effort and the amount of time that goes into actually fine tuning those and getting people what they actually want, it's almost an entire like job function in and of itself, even if you're not looking for the same type of outcomes that these extremely large companies have.
Yeah.
Shifting a little bit to what do you feel has been the largest impact on your business and your growth strategy, from AI and automation?
So I will say that we use AI tools, across the team. We've got people that are using them to, help write tests, augment and do little automations. We've taken time, we've invested in like, what would it actually take to build a system that would interrogate a set of documents and write an alternative interface to those things. So we've done some investing, mostly uh, to be able to educate ourselves about when and where these are good tools to use. They have their uses, they have purposes that are relevant to our customers. And I think that it's just kind of too early to be able to answer the question of what will the eventual impact be. I would say a similar amount of time and effort went into understanding and dealing with blockchain concepts, and those seem a little bit less relevant today than they did 2 years ago. And so am I equating blockchain to AI? No, but just saying that there's some rhyming going on there, and we're going to have to wait for the market to really sort out, where is the training data coming from? Who is anybody going to have to pay for that? And how much effort is really involved, like you said, to clean the data coming in and make a reasonable outcome based on these concepts that we're dealing with right now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, well, first of all, I really like that you used and instead of but, in terms of an operative word, because I think it indicates, a much greater openness in general to these technologies and the changes and the effects that they can have, whether that's good or. But I do really want to ask, like, what is working well for you right now, and what's frustrating, what's causing roadblocks and more headaches than maybe it's worth.
I think what's working right now is, more or less, we worked pretty closely with a company last July who was working towards this in a more focused manner. But I think getting a concise breakdown of a particular implementation of software, if I can go in and work in a version of software that is 2 or 3 versions ago, and be able to, so everything, all of its documentation is published. There's been lots of Stack Overflows and whatnot, Reddit posts that have been consumed by the AI bot. I have a pretty good suspicion that if I have a question, I could probably get a decent answer based off of that. With new technology, that is a frustration. It's because oftentimes things haven't been, models haven't been trained on this new information of the latest version of whichever library you're dealing with or whichever framework you're dealing with. That followed by hallucinations. So we were working with Stripe, and I thought Stripe has been done before. I will be able to rely on ChatGPT to be able to pull up some example code. And when I did that, it omitted, just some brackets and a 0, indicating that it was an array. And that wound up turning into a couple of hours of debugging that, had I just written from the demo original, like had I just gone to the documentation myself, it would have been fairly obvious. And so I think that there's a tendency to reach for these tools. And, we talked earlier about being able to see the impact or not see the impact. And I think that it will become the norm for things to just take a little bit longer because there's hallucinations or errors in the results, that at least for this consumer level use case, that I don't know that you're going to see the magic. The more that we do that, the less that we have those skills for doing our own research. One of the things when I was running a boot camp, we were teaching HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to people who'd never done anything besides sending an email. And one of the core skills that we taught them was how to find answers on the internet. And if your answer is always to, ask the computer to go find you an answer, that gives me pause.
Do you feel like that lowers people's critical thinking ability, because instead of them going and searching and sifting through Google results or Stack Overflow results or things like that, they're just being presented with a neat package provided by GPT?
I really do believe that. I don't know that I would have used those exact words, but I think what winds up happening is, had you gone out and searched for yourself, you wouldn't have expected it to work. But because you've got this super intelligent autonomous robot going out and getting it for you, you expect it to work, and you expect there to be no security flaws, and you expect a lot, honestly. And so if you don't expect it to work, you look at it skeptically. And I think that's valuable.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, both on the critical thinking side and also looking at it skeptically. On the critical thinking side, and also just people expecting it to do work for them and actually doing work for them. I've seen some studies come out where people who are using generative AI daily in their job for certain skill sets are seeing those skills decline. So people are actually getting worse at their job essentially from using AI. On the one hand, I think in a lot of ways, if the skill is critical thinking, that could be a dangerous loss of skill. But there's other skills that maybe can go to the wayside for a period of time. As an example, if you're using arithmetic on your job every day, you can get really fast and good at arithmetic. But if you're using spreadsheets all the time, your arithmetic is almost certainly going to decline, but you're going to get really good at spreadsheets. So there's an interesting put and take on all this in terms of trusting the AI or the tool that you're using too much. That I found really interesting as well, because it reminds me of some other conversations that Josh and I have had where people are pointing out you really need to know what your expertise is and where the AI's expertise is in order to have a good outcome. Whereas novices to something, the example that someone gave the other day is what font to use on a design. They happen to know that out of the 3 fonts that I think it was Gemini recommended, 2 of them were really bad ideas, but one of them was a really good idea, and it worked really well with the rest of the page. Because they were a professional designer, they were able to discern that and use AI well, but someone without the skill set would have been led astray in a sense.
I think absolutely that has happened to me. If I'm ever working in a topic where I know everything that's happening, using this as an automation tool, I see what it wrote and I was like, well, that's not helpful at all. Like, I know what I need. It's not that. And so when I'm approaching it from a position not of expertise, but of naivety, like, it generally does a pretty good job. Or is it just that I don't understand how it's, the downsides of what it is suggesting? And I think to double back onto, um, lowered critical thinking, et cetera. I have concerns about, the idea of using this as an expert and, just getting some things written down or like generated quickly is cool. I've heard several people describe, ChatGPT or Perplexity as like, it's like a junior developer. Like, they're gonna make mistakes, and you're not gonna understand why they're wrong. They're not gonna understand why they're wrong. You'll be able to see it. Like, great. So you can approach it with a layer of skepticism. But I used to be that junior developer who's writing code and people would correct me. And what happens to future generations of junior developers when that's been deemed not worthy of hiring somebody? How do they get those skill sets? How do they build up these debugging skill sets and working with other senior developers? It's possible that it'll all work out okay, but I'm not certain.
Yeah, I really like the comparison to these language models being treated as a junior developer, because I think that as I use these language models more both for like development work, which I don't do a ton of development work, but I do like I configure lambdas and things like that in AWS to run Python code based off of things, and then I also have been using it to help me with some Zapier automations and things like that also use Python in them, but also just like I treat it as a thought partner where I'm like, this is kind of what I want to do. But what I think I'm learning is that it's more about like similar to a junior developer or junior member of a team. It's about the instructions that I give it at the beginning. It's all about the prompt and the constraints of the prompt. Like if I just go to GPT and I'm like, I want to design a function that does this, it's gonna more likely not gonna spit out garbage. But if I design a prompt and I'm like, these are the inputs that I'm using, these are the outputs that I want, and these are the things I'd like you to do to the inputs to get that output, like I'm much more likely to get something that I want. So it's interesting seeing how this changes, or how this is going to change software development, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could create a more usable LLM product by saying, I think I did what, just responding at the end with, I think I've done what you want. Does that look right? Right? Like introducing that skepticism directly from in the response, because it is often missing stuff, and you all have probably had the experience where you see that it's done something wrong, and so you ask, like, are you sure? Didn't you mean that? Oh yeah, yep. That's what I meant. Sorry about that. Which is similar to what you would get with another person with less experience. I think the frustrating thing for me is that I can go and start, a dozen sessions with an LLM, and it it doesn't really learn contextually from lesson to lesson. I think that is a thing that a human does. Like, you could prompt it and continue feeding it and training it, or you could do that with a person.
That's a good point. For now, at least, the generative AI tools seem to be limited to the chat you're in, or at least the account that you're associating your conversations with. I know that ChatGPT released a greater like memory sense between chats, and people are both shocked, astounded, or scared by asking it like, well, what do you know about me? Can you describe me as a user? And it'll just like list off all these deep insights into who you are as a person, and hopefully not scare you too badly. But it also brings up some of the privacy concerns as well.
For sure.
Jim, with Flagrant, you don't just do software development, just the coding, right? You have teams that are engineering and might be more multidimensional with design and product management. Have you seen AI or automation impacting these other disciplines?
To a lesser degree, and I think logically, actually, that makes sense. It is, sort of famously, Midjourney had a problem with six fingers. Putting the context is harder in a visual form, whereas their code is fairly structured. I will never say that coding is not creative. It certainly is. But I just think that there's a lot of different variables that go into whether or not a design looks good, or that will likely get there with AI, but we're pretty far away from it today. And so the majority of my design team are consumers of AI, where it is forced upon them. Like all of their tools are trying to give them new AI features that they don't want. And the thing I hear most from them is that there are things that would be helpful. Going through and renaming all the layers in a document so that they made more sense. Like I've got all of these frames and they have some text on them. If you went through and renamed all those frames so that they made sense and they weren't frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, like that would actually be helpful. That it would be a useful use for AI. But trying to generate something that is appealing to a human from an aesthetic sense just has been difficult unless and until you've really, really solidly trained it on something like the Studio Ghibli stuff, and then it becomes instantly identifiable and, raises a lot of questions on that is a style. And the fact that everybody can look at it and identify it, like there's value there. And so what are the ethical ramifications of doing that? And so I think on the seeing it a lot less on the design front and on the product management front. I think the product management front is probably going to catch up next. I've seen some people trying to do research with ChatGPT, and I think that is fascinating. I won't say good, but fascinating. Like asking the training data what it knows about, whether or not this would be a useful affordance or whatnot. And I think at the end of the day, these things come down to you're not going to innovate with an LLM because it is always giving you answers from answers that it's been trained on. So it's kind of all been done before. Doesn't mean that they couldn't be done in a new configuration, but it just seems less likely.
Yeah, that's interesting. What you were saying about Studio Ghibli and having this likeness generated, it made me wonder, like, I wonder if anybody's trained a more local model or a GPT on a design system like Google. For instance, they have Paper, so you could train it on that, and you could probably generate a lot of UI on Paper. And would Google have a lawsuit at that point? More that would they want credit, even though a lot of people are copying Google's design system anyway, so maybe they would just be flattered. But I think the possibilities of where things will go in the next few years are pretty interesting, but it does raise a lot of ethical questions. I was listening to a TED recording with Sam Altman from a few days ago. He was addressing some of these questions, and it was interesting to hear the boos and the claps from the audience, just kind of supporting the need to resolve some of these ethical questions around creators and who should get credit. And he did ask for the world to support and also for OpenAI to be happy to implement solutions where if it was obvious in the question, in the prompt, like change this image to be in the style of Studio Ghibli. Could Studio Ghibli be and Miyazaki films be reimbursed for prompts that explicitly ask for the creation of those types of images? And it seems like that might be where the world is heading, at least for living artists and artists that are still under copyright. So hopefully that kind of solution will emerge soon.
I think you're a more optimistic person than I. Because I can tell you, if you go into ChatGPT today and say, hey, take this song and create a parody based on, instead of having it talk about one subject, talk about another. I think this would be fun for, my team to be able to share it internally or whatever. It just simply won't do it. It won't create lyrics based off of known copyrighted works. And so they have the power to do it today. If I say go and make me an avatar that in the style of Miyazaki, they have the power to say, oh, we really can't do that. That's not fair. And so they've done it in order to demonstrate that they can do it. And so to say that, we could back on this and pay for it seems, I don't know, it seems not altruistic. It seems like, I don't know, it seems problematic for lack of a better word. Because now they can say, well, okay, we're going to charge for this now. You want that Studio Ghibli avatar, it's going to be an additional buck. And, they share 75 cents of that to Miyazaki. It's like, you're still making money in the middle. You still trained it on all of the data. And like I don't have answers for any of these things. They're really interesting questions.
Hopefully the role of AI ethicist is in as demand as prompt engineer, but we'll see where things are going.
Yeah, I mean, there's also just the, what do you call it, the sustainability of the models in general. Like there's lots and lots and lots being thrown at these things, and people are using them for little to no payment. So as I have developers who I am paying six figures a year and they're getting a little bit faster, or maybe we consider not hiring a junior developer for 80K. What happens if that price suddenly ratchets up from zero to what is the top end of that even look like?
100%. I think one is 200 a month. And we were also talking to a friend of ours who's a software engineer, and he's using, I believe it's Anthropic's latest model. And he was talking about how the costs ramp up pretty quickly. He was, even though they're using an enterprise account, he still has to watch his own consumption. And, 500 here, 500 there can go quickly. It will be interesting because if they know that it can replace an 80K engineer, then the costs could go up dramatically.
And are we as engineers, as designers, as consumers, are we training it, basically how to charge us more money in the future? Like, what are the things that people ask about? What are all those prompts? What do all those prompts look like? And at the end of the day, for us to, certainly a junior developer could come on staff and, we could teach them a bunch of stuff and they would leave. At least at the end of the day, if they go and work somewhere else, all of the money that we invested in them moves on to the next company and creates a stronger company over there. Whereas here, does the switch just get flipped off? And is there any benefit for the broader us than, maybe we give a little bit more training data for the next round?
Yeah, it really points to massive concentration of power and money with the larger companies, at least for now.
Which I think gives many of us pause in our current economic climate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely a lot to consider there. I just thinking about like the customer lock-in, essentially. Like if you choose to, like if you develop your own GPT, your own project space in Anthropic, whatever it is, it becomes an expert on your company and how your company codes or your styles or your brand or what have you. The fact that you are then locked into like whatever that model is, and if you were to go somewhere else, you'd be starting new, fresh, which isn't necessarily bad, but there's a lot of out there. That said, what metrics or outcomes are you most focused on related to AI automation?
I mean, I think for us, there are simple numbers that we pay attention to. Is, are we able to serve our clients in roughly the amount of time that we expect? And are they continuing to be willing to pay for, our services? Do they necessarily know when we're using AI and not? We're upfront with folks when we use it, but most people also aren't asking at this point. And so it comes down to, which is probably obvious through the rest of this interview, it comes down to, are we able to continue to sustain our team and our ability to do the work that we love to do, yes or no? And so that those are really the metrics that we're looking at. And so far, AI has been a lot of hype and not a whole lot of smoke. But there's a whole generation of developers out there that are sitting on the sidelines, kind of waiting for an opportunity as well.
For sure. Switching gears a bit to the future and where you'd like to see Flagrant, where would you like to see things in 6 to 12 months?
I would love for us to just be well respected for the really quality design work that we do and just in product work in general. I think that we started in 2022, we really started this notion of building towards whole product teams, and it's worked out pretty well. There's been some external factors that have caused things to be a little tougher sledding than we expected. With the idea that software is communication for people, I hope that we're able to continue the conversation for as many people as we're able to.
Nice. Yeah. So in terms of the multidisciplinary teams with product design and engineering, the classic product trio, if you could wave a magic wand in terms of Flagrant's work with customers and with the market and even internally, and solve a challenge that you see coming up, what would you solve?
It's a big question. I don't even know if this is at the spirit of in the spirit of your question, but I would just love for some consistency in the industry, and for people to be able to make plans and execute those plans over a reasonable period. There's a fair amount of chaos and whatnot in the world at the moment. Yeah, I just would be cool if things were a little bit more even for everybody.
Yeah, the pace of change in the last few months all over from a lot of different dynamics, political, economic, and also industry specific it's been a roller coaster. Are there any specific changes that you're most concerned about or maybe on the flip side seem as a good opportunity?
I will say, and I have said to anybody that will listen, if I were in the EU right now, or if I were in a country outside of the US, I would be starting local competitors to US tech. I think that uh, I listen to sales calls. My spouse runs a software as a service, and she talks to people from all over the world. And the number of no's that she gets from people because the data ultimately resides in the U.S., or the number of people that ask if they can host it on their own software or on their own hardware has gone up significantly in the last 3 months or so. And so I think that there's an opportunity for folks uh, who are capable of putting together hosting platforms, putting together SaaS services. I wonder a little bit whether there is any upside to a company like Flagrant, who's all US based. Is there a downside coming for outsourcing services outside of the US? And from my understanding of reading about tariffs, like it's all products, services aren't considered. And so that, it seems like all of the negative with none of the positives so far. It could all change tomorrow. We don't know.
Yep. It's too true. The market and all this environment is increasingly unstable. So hopefully, I agree with you 100%. Hopefully, in 6 to 12 months, things are more predictable, and we're sitting in a spot where there's a foundation that people can build from. Jim, we've really appreciated the conversation with you today, and we like to wrap up asking you about inspiration. Is there a book or podcast or person that has especially inspired you recently?
So I will say this is a long-standing inspiration, but I've got a good friend who does coaching through the tenets of improv comedy, and she always finds her way into the strangest situations. One time she worked with the UN, and I said, like, what is working with the UN from a improv comedy coaching perspective look like? She's like, oh, I had them playing hide and seek on Zoom, and so I'm inspired by her. Her name is Jessie Stern. She's of the Improv Effect, and she's got a couple of books out. But that's where I would point that today.
That's awesome. Yeah, we'll put a link to her in the show notes.
Awesome.
I have a hard time picturing hide and seek on Zoom, but I'll take your word for it.
Like quite literally, she just encourages play, but there's always a reason behind it. We had her come to one of our conferences. Over the years, we've hosted a number of conferences, and we had one in the winter, and so we had a snowball fight inside of the conference room where everybody wrote down a fact about themselves and crumpled it into a piece of paper, and then you took your snowball and you threw it across to the other side of the room. Everybody picked up a piece of paper, uncrumpled it, and tried to figure out who this was for. And so wound up, going through and talking to bunches of people throughout the conference, and really getting to know a lot more people. Activities like that, more often than not, she's working with C-suites and whatnot. But
It's impressive. And Jim, how can people learn more about Flagrant?
you can go to beflagrant.com. That's BEFLAGRANT.com. Find us on LinkedIn, Blue Sky. I think a lot of the usual spots. I tried to cancel our Twitter account, but it had already been suspended for us. So
Being too flagrant.
apparently.
All right. Awesome, Jim. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today.